Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing Destiny 2 beta on the GeForce GTX 1050 Ti for FPS monitoring. This time I won't be using cam since Bungie blocked code injection, but I managed to get MSI Afterburner to work here by using Ryzen stealth mode option. And if you enjoyed the content and want to support the channel directly, there's a link to the Patreon page down in the description. So Destiny 2 beta, I'll be doing 1080p, 900p, 720p and 1440p. So first I'll show you 1080p trying to get 60 frames per second. And it will be possible to be very close to our target by using something similar to medium settings. I was able to be at 60 frames per second or over on most scenes at the beginning, but on many enemy and effect heavy places, the GPU will be the bottleneck, so we will be in the mid 40s as the worst case scenario. Then I'll crank up the settings trying to stay over 30 frames per second, and it will be quite easy to do so by just using all maxed out except in anti-aliasing, which will be on SMAA instead of MSAA. Then I'll do the same thing for 900p and 720p at 60 frames per second configuration, and then a 30 frames per second configuration, which means higher settings. At 1440p it was impossible to get 60 frames per second constant in those heavy scenes, so I'll just make the configuration to stay over 30 frames per second pretty much all the time. After all that, I'll test 900p and 720p once again, but this time using a Ryzen 3 1200 overclock to 3.9 GHz. That will allow us to stay over 60 frames per second much more often than on the G4560 on those two resolutions. When some enemies show up plus effects on that area that I'm trying, you can see a noticeable difference on 900p and 720p when trying to get 60 frames per second. On the G4560 there are drops into the 40s, but the Ryzen 3 1200 can stay at 60 frames per second pretty much all the time. There are some drops to 57, 58, but those are like a few seconds in a 3-minute video, so that's why I tested those two resolutions there. If you want to play this game at 60 frames per second, other than having a good enough GPU, you need a decent CPU. I tried that G4560, a 2-core 4-thread CPU, and it was enough to stay over 45 frames per second on heavy scenes. 60 frames per second constant in that case was impossible. Open areas after the prologue and many enemies on screen made the frame rate and GPU usage tank, and the CPU usage was high, around 80 to 95%. To fix that, I tried a Ryzen 3 1200 overclocked to 3.9 GHz, and it was much better on those moments. Maintaining 60 frames per second was much easier, so an i5 Ryzen 5 or better than that should be enough to maintain constant 60 frames per second if your GPU is good enough. Keep in mind that this is a beta, so I couldn't test more of the game. What I show here is an enemy and effect heavy scene that hits the GPU a lot and the CPU when enemies show up. I'll test more open areas once the final game releases, so we got a better understanding on how it performs. The options menu has a good amount of options, but to get a good performance boost you'll need to lower settings in groups. Just avoid MSAA, it's like half the frame rate with it enabled. Use SMAA. So first I'll lower shadows, ambient occlusion, depth of field, light shafts, character and environment detail together. That was the best way to get a higher frame rate, at least in my experience. Other than that, the game's performance isn't too different. I was expecting to be able to disable reflections or something like that, but that seems to be impossible. So changing those settings should be your best chance to get better performance, since putting the settings lower than medium didn't help me that much to get a higher frame rate. Anyway guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you keep enjoying the video, thanks for watching and see you next time.
gotta keep going. We need to find the speaker.
Go! Find the speaker! Drop bomb! I'll take care of these!
Probably should catch up to Ikora. Now! We need to leave now!